Today I want to share with you how to make Depression-era peanut butter bread. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nourishing foods like bone broth, ferment, sourdough, and more. So if you enjoy learning how to be a modern pioneer in the kitchen, consider subscribing to my channel and don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. If at any time you want to jump ahead in this video, I'll have the chapter timestamps for you in the description and in the pinned comment, and I'll also have a link to the printable recipe there for you. Well, this recipe became very popular during the Great Depression of the 1930s, and the reason was that butter and eggs were expensive and often not even available. So the home cooks had to be very clever and come up with a way where they could still make quick breads without any butter and without any eggs. Well, enter peanut butter. It saved the day. It was very available and it was also very affordable. And during the Great Depression of the 1930s, many people were poor, and they would wait on what were known as relief lines, where the local governments would pass out food to them. And the people had to really accept whatever they were given, and often were given ingredients that they may not always be immediately familiar with. But one of those ingredients was peanut butter. And so clever home cooks figured out how to use that peanut butter to make some wonderful baked goods. Now, if you're like me and you enjoy the history of food, if you'd ever like to learn more about how peanut butter actually came into existence, be sure to look up the story of George Washington Carver. He was one of my favorite stories to read to my son when he was a little boy, because he's such a fascinating man. And when he discovered that if you grew peanuts, that would really help the soil. But then everybody needed to know what to do with peanuts. And he came up with so many inventions. His story will just boggle your mind. So if you're a homeschool mom or if you're reading to your children in the evening, be sure to find his children's biography. You'll really enjoy it. Now let's go over the ingredients that we're going to need to make this peanut butter bread. They're very simple and I'm confident that you have them on hand. But I do want to take a minute to talk about the flour. Now, if you've been with me for a while, you know I like to buy whole grain and then grind it to make my flour fresh. And two of my favorite grains to grind into flour are whole grain spelt and whole grain einkorn. These are ancient grains. And I have many videos where I've showed you how I grind grain using my favorite electric grain mill, the Mock Mill. And I'll be sure to link to those videos in the description and in the pinned comment underneath this video, if that's something that you're interested in learning about. And also, don't forget, I'll also put another link down there that will link you to my shopping guide, where I have a discount coupon code for the Mock Mill, if that's ever something that you're interested in buying. It's very reasonable, it's very well made. I'm so pleased with it. I did a lot of research before I purchased it, and I was so pleased with it that I contacted the company and asked them for a discount coupon code for my viewers. So if you're in the market for a grain mill, that's a fantastic one. So what I often do is grind my whole grain spelt or grind my whole grain einkorn, and then I use sifters to sift out some of the bran and the germ. Usually if I'm baking a sourdough bread or something along those lines, any type of bread as a matter of fact, I'll only sift out about a quarter of the bran and the germ. And I don't mind doing that, and I don't feel bad about doing it, because it's something that our ancestors did. They knew that sifting out a little bit of the bran and the germ would create a lighter loaf. But you can take things one step further and sift out not all, but most of the bran and the germ. You're not going to be able to do it the way machinery can in a factory, but you can come pretty close to making your own all-purpose flour. Now, you can certainly do this with wheat berries, if that's what you have on hand, modern-day wheat berries, or you can do it with your whole grain spelt berries, or your einkorn berries. Whatever the type of wheat berry you have, they are in essence wheat berries, they're just ancient grain wheat berries. So you can grind them and sift them to your heart's content to create either somewhat of a rustic flour that still has a lot of the bran and germ in it, or you can leave all the bran and germ intact if you want to make a whole grain flour. Or you can sift out as much bran and germ as you can, and you can have what I've got here, my version of an einkorn all-purpose flour. Now the reason why I like to use ancient grains, where I've sifted out the bulk of the bran and the germ, if the recipe I'm following calls for all-purpose flour, is because ancient grains are lower in gluten, and they make wonderful flours for using whenever you make quick breads. They're almost, to a certain extent, like having a homemade pastry flour. And if you bake with spelt or you bake with einkorn, whether the whole grain flour or the all-purpose version, you will always find that you have lovely, tender baked goods. And today it's becoming more common to be able to find a version of all-purpose spelt flour or all-purpose einkorn flour at the grocery store or sometimes specialty stores. So if you grind your own grain, your own ancient grain, and you sift it and create an all-purpose flour, that's great. If you want to buy all-purpose versions of the ancient grains like spelt and einkorn, that's great too. But I highly recommend that you experiment with them, because I think you're going to be very pleased using ancient grains to make quick breads. And the nice thing about the ancient grains, especially einkorn, is they're very nutritious. And einkorn actually has a relatively high level of beta-carotene or beta-carotene, the precursor of vitamin A, and which is very good for the eyes. And even when you sift out the bran and the germ, you'll notice that the flour almost has a little bit of a yellowish or beige tinge to it. And that is the beta-carotene or beta-carotene. But by all means, you can certainly use all-purpose flour, just the plain all-purpose flour that you buy at the grocery store to make this peanut butter bread. The first thing that you're going to need is 2 cups of your all-purpose flour. Next, you're going to need a 1/2 cup of peanut butter. Now, my parents, both of whom who lived during the Great Depression of the 1930s, shared with me that the peanut butter was a little different than the peanut butter that we think of today. The peanut butter that they had was basically just ground peanuts, and it was kind of on the chunky side. So the closest thing to that today is if you can find a natural peanut butter that's maybe just ground peanuts and some salt and still has some bits and bobs, so to speak, of peanuts mixed in it, a chunky peanut butter. So what I've got here is just a plain chunky peanut butter. It's just peanuts and salt, that's it. Next, you're going to need a 1/4 cup of molasses. And this is just a plain unsulfured molasses. It's not the blackstrap molasses. Although if you have that, you can certainly use it, but just keep in mind that blackstrap molasses is boiled more than your plain molasses. And so the flavor is more intense and it can be a little more bitter. Now you'll notice that a lot of modern day recipes will call for a 1/4 cup or more of sugar, and they'll also be using a sweetened modern day peanut butter. But I really wanted to make this recipe, in terms of the peanut butter and the sweetener, a little more similar to what my parents would have enjoyed. During the Depression, sugar was expensive, and most home cooks were on a very tight budget, and so they would often defer to using molasses as their sweetener. Molasses was readily available and it was very inexpensive. And my mother shares with me that her mother, my maternal grandmother Louise, exclusively used molasses as her sweetener. But you know what the good thing about this is? Molasses is a lot more nutritious than white sugar. So by using molasses, people during the Great Depression were actually getting better nutrition than if they had white sugar. Now, can you use white sugar in this? Certainly. It's going to really depend where you might be on your traditional foods journey. I try not to use too much white sugar. If you've already transitioned and are using the dried whole sugar cane, what we know sometimes as sucanat or rapadura, you could certainly use a 1/4 cup of that. If you decide to use a dry sweetener, like the sugar or the sucanat, then you'll want to increase your milk. What I've got here is a 1 1/4 cups of milk. If you use a dry sweetener, you'll want to increase that to 1 1/3 cups of milk. And speaking of milk, I have whole milk here, and I have 1 1/4 cups since I am using a liquid sweetener. Next, you'll just want 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and then you're also going to need some baking powder. Now let's take a minute to talk about the baking powder. Now, if you're able to find old cookbooks from the 1930s and you see the peanut butter bread recipe in there, and it'll just be called that, peanut butter bread, not Depression era peanut butter bread, you may notice that some of those recipes call for a lot of baking powder. So why is that? I found that very interesting. And I've done some research on baking powder, and I've learned a lot about it, but I don't know exactly why these recipes called for so much baking powder. Now, if you do, please let me know in the comments below. I have some theories which I'll share with you, but if you know specifically why these recipes called for so much baking powder, I would love to learn from you. So let me know in the comments below. But what I've learned is that baking powder has been on quite a journey, and it's very interesting that there were even baking powder wars, so to speak, between different companies that were making baking powder. But baking powder that doesn't have aluminum in it may not rise baked goods as well as baking powder that does have aluminum in it. Now, as traditional food cooks, we like to avoid aluminum in our food if we can. So we'll often search out aluminum-free baking powder. So maybe that had something to do with it. But in any event, I'm going to go ahead and put 4 teaspoons of baking powder in this recipe, in this Depression-era peanut butter bread, and we'll see how it comes out. Alrighty, well, let's get to making this peanut butter bread. The first thing that you want to do is preheat your oven to 325 degrees Fahrenheit. Then you want to get a loaf pan, and the one I have here is 9 by 5, 9 inches by 5 inches. Now, most of these older recipes don't specify what type of pan, what exact size pan to put your batter in. Sometimes the loaf pans today may be 4.5 by 8. This one's 9 by 5. I wouldn't worry too much about it. Next, you're going to want to take your loaf pan and grease it really well. Now, I am going to cheat and I'm going to use a little butter, but you could certainly be more authentic if you've got it, and you can use some bacon grease. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, home cooks were extremely frugal and careful. And whenever they cooked anything that might be greasy, whether if they had a little bacon or a little pork or a little meat, or a little chicken, whatever the case may be, they saved all those fat drippings and they used them in any way needed in their kitchen, both to bake things as well as to grease things. And I'll share a very interesting story with you, which will actually come in a future video, where I'm going to share another recipe with you about people really making use of everything they had. And these are stories too that my mother has shared with me, that during World War II, mothers would save whatever little bits of fat they had, and they would then either render them, or if they had been cooking something and they had the fat, had the fat drippings, once they were used up to the point that they felt couldn't be used anymore, they would melt them down all together, strain them so there were no little bits and bobs of anything in the fat, and they would have it in a can. And then they would bring the can to the butcher, who would scoop out the fat, because cans were precious too, and put it in with a big supply of fat, and then give the can back to the homemaker and give the homemaker some money, because the military used the fat to grease machinery. How about that? So I hope you don't mind me sharing these stories with you as we're making this peanut butter bread. But I just so admire my parents' generation because all of these home cooks were so conscious about not wasting anything. And we can really learn from them, look up to them, and emulate them in our own traditional foods kitchen. I just think it's absolutely wonderful. My mother never wasted anything. I mean, the way that my mom could make a meal out of scraps to this day just really impresses me. So I hope that we can all strive to save every little last bit of food and relook at what would be the right way to phrase it, to look at every little last bit of food in a new light and think, what can I make with that? So I think that's how my mom and my grandmother and my aunts and all the women, my grandmother on my father's side of the family, they never wasted anything, and we could learn a lot from them. Well, what I'm going to do now is take the salt, and I'm going to go ahead and just put that right into my flour. Then I'm going to go and use this measuring spoon. I've got a 1 teaspoon here, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to measure out 4 teaspoons of the baking powder, and just go ahead and put that right in with my all-purpose flour. That's 3, and then we got 4 in there. Okay. Let me close this up. Yes, H-E-B baking powder. For those of you in Central Texas, you know I love my H-E-B. Alrighty, now I'm going to get my whisk here, and I'm just going to give this a good whisking to make sure that that baking powder, as well as the salt, is very well combined with this all-purpose flour, very well distributed. And if you've been with me for a while, you know I love my magic whisk. I use this thing for everything. It's amazing. It just works so beautifully. And definitely look for one in your kitchen store. I'll put a link in the description below, but hopefully maybe you can find it at a local kitchen store. Once you start using a magic whisk, it's going to be hard to use any other whisk. Even though it's little, I'm telling you, it really does the job. The next thing that I'm going to do is take my 1.25 cups of milk, and I'm going to go ahead and pour this peanut butter right into my milk. Yes, can you, I was just going to say, I like to do this, that I had a little change of thought to explain to you why I'm doing this, that yes, a lot of recipes will call about just pouring in the milk and putting in the peanut butter, and yes, you can definitely do that. But I find whenever I'm working with peanut butter or any type of nut butter, as well as liquid sweeteners, things seem to mix better if they're first mixed in the liquid that you're using in the recipe. That's assuming the recipe has liquid in it. And the reason is I like to get everything in together in one fell swoop, because if you've baked quick breads before, muffins, anything like that, it doesn't like to be overmixed. When you overmix these things, they can get tough. So by doing this, I just pour it in, and then I'm all set. And then I just can mix everything easily, and I'm going to use my magic whisk to incorporate all of this into the milk. And then we'll go ahead and pour it into the flour, and then we'll just use our spatula to mix it up gently and then pop it right into our pan. And I did go ahead and I did grease my pan with some butter. Now what I'm going to do is just make a little well in the center of my flour. It's always helpful to make a little well like that in your flour whenever you're working with a recipe where you're adding in liquid, because it does make it easier to blend than just trying to pour the liquid right on top of a big mound of flour. Then all we're going to do is use our spatula to just incorporate the wet ingredients with the dry ingredients. Well, we've got everything incorporated together, so now we're just going to go ahead and pile this into our loaf pan. And you know what's nice about this peanut butter bread? That even though this was born more or less, out of desperation during the Great Depression. This was so popular that it was so delicious and so enjoyable that it stayed popular for many years and is now being rediscovered during these difficult times that we're living through. Now, once you get your batter into your loaf pan, just spread it out best you can with your spatula, making sure that you get batter into every corner, and then just even it out so that you pretty much have a little bit of batter everywhere. Now we're going to go ahead and put this into our 325 Fahrenheit preheated oven, and we're going to bake this for 1 hour. Now, keep in mind, every oven is different, so just keep an eye on it. When you're getting maybe around 50 minutes or even 45 minutes, make sure that it's not over browning on top. If it is, you can always tent it with foil. You may even want to check it at about 50 minutes with a toothpick inserted into the center of the bread. If the toothpick comes out clean, then your bread is baked. So just keep an eye the first time that you make this. Keep an eye on it because, as I said, every oven is different. Alrighty? Let's go put this in the oven and let it bake for an hour. So in my oven at 325 Fahrenheit, my Depression-era peanut butter bread was ready in 50 minutes. I checked it at that point, put the toothpick in, the toothpick came out clean, and so I decided, alrighty, I'm going to take it out. Now, many of these recipes do call for baking your bread for 1 hour. However, as I mentioned before we put this into the oven, you do want to keep an eye on it and you do want to check it because every oven is different. So what I'm going to do now is take this bread out of the pan. Oh, it releases beautifully. You can smell the peanut butter. Oh, this is going to be delicious. And we'll just let that rest. Let's just let that cool for a little bit. And then we'll give it a slice, give it a taste, and we can see how the texture inside is as well. Well, I let this cool about 10 minutes, and now I just have to slice into this beauty. The aroma is fantastic. Okay. Oh, look at how lovely this came. I'll definitely give you some close-ups, and then we'll give it a taste as well. Oh, the aroma. You really smell the peanut butter. I was wondering if the molasses might take over, but it doesn't at all. We'll see how it is when we taste it, but the aroma of the peanut butter is fantastic. Well, I cut a few more slices so we could really get into the middle and see how nice this came, and it really does look glorious. So now let's give it a taste test. That's what's most important. Let's see if the peanut butter and a little bit of the molasses flavor comes through. Excuse me. It's really good. You get very much a peanut butter flavor. I really don't taste the molasses at all. This is fantastic, and it's not overly sweet, so you could definitely use this, as a breakfast bread. I think this is wonderful. I can see why this recipe stayed popular for as long as it did. Now, if you'd like more Depression-era recipes, as well as budget-friendly recipes, including the very popular Depression-era tuna pie, be sure to click on this video over here where I have a whole playlist for you. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless.